and later learned that, 9 of my family members had been either shot or had been in the home with the home when it exploded.
It would be very easy for you to have hatred in your heart instead of love. No one would judge you for being bitter.
Right.
Do you hold any resentment or anger or bitterness towards him?
And as much as I miss my family and my loved ones, I just am so full of gratitude for what I have had, the blessings that I've had, what I experienced in my relationships during difficult times when they were living. Was hope. We went through it. We, overcame challenges, and we were able to persevere. So I saw that in my family, and I thought, there's no way I could allow that this monster, crush those of us that are still here.
I know that you don't do a lot of these interviews, and I suppose one of the reasons why, I would imagine, is that it's too painful to go back there to that day and to talk about that and the feelings that you had around that time. One of the things that I want to have a conversation with you about later is about hope and the importance of hope through your life. What do you hope for by sharing your story today?
Well, I most importantly want to bring some type of maybe inspiration to, if not one person, to more than one person. The reason I decide to share my story with people like yourself, that I just want to make sure that I can feel my story can inspire and bring hope to others, and possibly just give someone an opportunity to look back at their life and give them a chance to take a step forward, even if it's just one step, to move forward beyond what they're going through at the time with their adversity and their challenges.
Your website that you set up was Leticia's Hope. What's your aim behind that?
Well, my mission, again, is to inspire others and hopefully give some, resources on my blog and share personal stories of what I've been through, with not only the tragedy and what our family had to endure on that, horrible Christmas night, but just other stories that I've, been able to share about my family, about what I've been through, about raising my girls, and just try to do what I can to put out positivity in the world and give some kind of love and inspiration and hope.
I know it's painful, but take me back to 2008 when it was Christmas Eve. Share with me what you feel comfortable with in sharing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was celebrating Christmas Eve with my husband and my 2 daughters. My youngest daughter was 5 at the time, and my older daughter was 8. She had just turned 8. And we were celebrating Christmas Eve, just like we had always done with my family at my parents' home. There were about 23, I always forget because I don't talk about it as much anymore, but all of my siblings were there with their families. And basically we were just in the middle of closing out the night, and around 11:30 we heard a doorbell, and it was Santa Claus. And in the past, we used to have my parents' neighbor come to the house, dress up as Santa Claus, and bring gifts to the little ones. So that family had moved a couple of years before, so we didn't do it the prior year. And we thought it was a surprise that maybe someone had set up to continue the tradition. And at that point, my daughter had said Santa Claus is at the door, and she had seen him through the window. My brother came to the door, and I was sitting in the living room, and my family, we were all kind of in different areas of the home since we were kind of closing out the night. We had been packing up to leave, and I was at the other side of the house, and we started hearing what I thought were balloons. And so my husband just said, grab the kids. We heard screaming, and we exited the house. We ran out of the house. And at that point, I had glanced over to see what had been happening. And I realized, I recognized the person behind the beard and the glasses, but I couldn't pinpoint it right then and there. Obviously, the adrenaline, the trauma, everything that was happening at that time, we had to just get out. And so we escaped, and I'm thankful. My daughter had gotten shot in the face, and we didn't realize that until a little after we were outside. It was very dark. We were trying to stay quiet, and we escaped, and later learned that 9 of my family members had been either shot or had been in the home with the home when it exploded. And so this monster who came in and took the lives of my family, he had brought in some kind of I forget what they call it, this device. This is like explosive device to spray it, fire, basically, like a fire gun. Mm-hmm. And so he really tried to take all of our lives. That was his plan. Mm-hmm. And somehow, my husband and I were able to escape, and we were the only elders, adults, and the rest of my nieces and nephews, which were 13 of them that survived. So
who were the 9 family members?
So I lost my mom and my dad, and I lost my 2 brothers, James and Charles, their wives, Terry and Sherry, and my sister Sylvia, and my sister Alicia, and my nephew, who was 17 years old, Michael.
Mm-hmm. And your daughter was how old?
She was 8 at the time. Mm-hmm. My other niece had also gotten shot in her back, like a graze. And, we had, my niece who had gotten injured because she had jumped from the 2nd floor mm-hmm. to escape the fire. And my, a couple of my nephews had broken windows to escape mm-hmm. as well.
How did you comfort your daughter?
I immediately told her, we're going to get out of here. It's going to be okay. We're going to get home. You'll be okay. I ended up leaving with my daughter in the ambulance. And when we were in the ambulance, and I've never shared this part, I've never shared these details with anyone, but when we were in the ambulance, it took a really long time to get an ambulance to us. Mm-hmm. So that was really difficult. And actually, even leaving, we escaped from my house. We ended up at my neighbor's house, and at my parents' neighbor's house. And when the police showed up in the fire department's actually who showed up first with 1 police officer. And so we were escorted with my daughter, just my daughter and myself, mm-hmm. With this fireman and police officer. And, at the time I was, freaking out, thinking there's a possibility that he is still out there in the front yard. We had continued to hear gunshots. So we didn't know, we didn't know what was going on. And one of the things that I did was I covered my daughter's eyes. I did not want her to see the fire. I did not want her to think of my parents or my family and the home where I grew up, and the home that was just all joy, and love and laughter, be, the last visions of her. I mean, her seeing the last visions of the house on fire. And I frankly, saw it once and that was it. I did not want to see it like that again. And I knew that, those are images you just can't ever erase. So it was really important for me to just block her from seeing that as we exited. And at the same time, just trying to make sure that the police officer and the firemen were aware that it's possible that the monster was still out there. So I was kind of directing them as to where to walk to and where to go. It was kind of weird that I was bossing them around in the moment of trauma. And ambulance showed up and we were able to get into the ambulance. But I kept hearing in the background that someone else had been shot. And it just took the ambulance so long to arrive that I felt like we couldn't just leave. And I noticed that my daughter she was whimpering and crying, but she was, for the most part, calm, considering this trauma. So I told the ambulance, the paramedics, to wait so that we could wait for whoever it was that was shot. I didn't know. I said to wait for my other relative. And we did for a couple minutes, and they brought in my niece. And that is, that's what happened that night. And, thankfully my niece and my daughter survived, and we were okay. I was physically not wounded. I had some scratches and, cuts and stuff from jumping the wall. But that was.
How long after that did you get the full number of the casualties?
The next day, pretty much. The next day. The next morning, I stayed at the hospital the whole night by myself. I mean, my husband and my other daughter and the rest of the kids had gone to the police station to, so they could share what they knew. And I think at that point they realized, who had not been contacted, who had not been, who had not returned, and who had not contacted friends or family in case they were still there. I was not a part of that. As I shared, I was at the hospital with my daughter, and she was in critical condition, and she was, even though she was awake and alert, it was just a very traumatic time.
And the obvious question would be, how did you feel? How did you feel when you realized the number? How did you feel when you saw your daughter? But I suppose I would imagine it's just a feeling of utter shock and a numbness.
Yes. Well, I was in shock. I was in shock. I was obviously still dealing with some of the trauma. So part of that was I was shaking. My body had been shaking and it wouldn't stop shaking. So it was just hard to kind of catch my breath, and of course, I was in tears, but yet a part of me was in control. It was this strange emotional feeling. So I was in shock. I went down to my knees and cried, and I don't even know if I yelled. I probably did. I don't remember. And I just knew at that point I gave myself just like a few minutes and I said, okay, like I need to get to work. Kind of, that was my response. It was just like, I need to tend to my daughter. I don't want to be away from her. Um, I needed to make sure that my niece was, being, watched over. She was in a different department of the hospital. So I had been walking back and forth from seeing my daughter and being with my daughter to going to check in on my niece. And it was this fear of being alone, because I was doing this by myself. No one was with me at the hospital. No one was able to come in the ambulance. They only allowed my niece and my daughter, I mean those that were injured, and myself. So, and the police department needed to hold on to everybody, all of our family members that were there, because they had to interview them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very, very stressful, as you can imagine, traumatic and chaotic time. This was Christmas Eve, at the end of the night. And what I learned later were that, the chiefs and the heads of the department, the head detectives and head police officers and sergeants, were with their families. So it was a little bit more chaotic, to say the least, on Christmas Eve, to have your best, ready and set to tend to a violent crime.
Mm. What got you through that first week?
Faith, God, 100%. The only person I can rely on, and who I've always relied on, is God and my faith. I have strong faith. And I knew, even at the hospital, I knew in my spirit that I would be okay. The hardest part, about that was guaranteeing that everyone else in my family would be okay. It's one thing I could have faith and know what I can do for myself, to have that strength and determination and perseverance to overcome. It's another thing to be able to guarantee that for your family.
Did you feel that weight of responsibility, because you had your mum and dad up to that point? You were the youngest sibling. You had a whole family of 7, but suddenly you're the only surviving member. Did you feel a pressure and responsibility to look after everyone else?
Yes. And I wouldn't say pressure. I just felt it was an automatic role for me. Our family was so tight and so close, and we all, helped each other through, other, moments in our lives of hard times and difficult times that we had experienced. And so we all leaned on each other. We all supported each other. But for me, yes, personally, being the youngest of the family, I always said I had 5 sets of parents, because they all kind of always looked out for me and were always in my business. So as a teenager growing up, my oldest sister was 7 years older than me. And then my sister was 10 years older, Alicia, and my brother Charlie was 14 years, and my brother Junior, 17 years. So growing up in our family, they all knew what was going on with, in relationships and friendships and all the stuff that happens in life. So not having them at this time, of course, it was very traumatic. But for me, at that time I was 37 years old, and I had my kids, and so it was just an automatic thing to take care of my family and take care of my nieces and nephews, do everything I could to help support them and guide them and be there for them.
How long after the tragedy did you begin to grieve?
Well, I mean, right away. I'm pretty raw and real and honest about what just in life in general. Just
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to suppress emotions,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's good times or bad times,
Mm-hmm.
laughter. I just it's just not me.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, of course I had tremendous grief. I think the first emotion that I really had to deal with was obviously the shock.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so focused on my daughter, making sure she was, going to be better and get out of the hospital and go through her surgery. And so that was my focus. My priority right then and there was taking care of my daughter and making sure she was okay. And my younger daughter, who was not physically injured, she emotionally, this was so difficult for the young ones. And so I had to process and think about how that would be for them. They can't process like adults do. So I needed to know how I could manage in supporting my youngest one too, and then my niece, and knowing that my niece, Amanda, my sister's daughter, who at the time was 6.5, she's our goddaughter as well.
Mm-hmm.
She was the youngest, next to my children, and how to help her and take her in at home. I mean, it was an automatic given
Mm-hmm.
that she would be with my husband and I. And she had lived with us a few months prior with my
Mm-hmm.
sister when she was first separated from the
Mm-hmm.
monster. So they were with us, and it just seemed like it was the right thing to do. So taking care of my family to me, and grieving at the time, could mean a lot. Grief can come in so many different ways, and it could be whether it's just the shock of it, whether it's just putting meaning towards what the loss had been or has
Mm-hmm.
been. There's so many elements and layers to grief.
Mm. Because you lost 9 family members, did you find that the grief was different to how you grieved each one of them?
Yes, I mean, it's compounded, so it was overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to grieve, for just one family member. I think, I my sister's first husband, um, he died in a car accident, and she was, um, expecting their second child, and she had been driving. So it was very traumatic to go through that. I was 16 at the time. And I remember how difficult it was for me. I mean, I wasn't extremely close to my brother-in-law because I was younger, but I spent a lot of time with them. And so that was really probably one of, the hardest times too in our family when we lost him, going through that grief. But it was, one single person, and it took time. And again, I was at a different age.
Mm-hmm.
So processing the grief was definitely different. But in this case, it was absolutely overwhelming. It was absolutely overwhelming, not being able to just focus on one
Mm-hmm.
person and grieve them. And so having to grieve my mom and my dad at the same time, those relationships, and then having to grieve my siblings, differently. And then my nephew, who was only 17, who just had this future ahead of him. And even though my relationship with my nephew is completely different than with my siblings, you still feel that immense pain, in your heart.
Mm-hmm. And because you've been through grief before, how different was it this time? Because this wasn't an accident or a natural disaster. This was intentional, with the intent to harm. How did you deal with that?
I compartmentalized. So that's pretty much how I was able to, I think, manage on dealing with the trauma and what I had to work on in my healing personally with the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then focus then on the grief, which was, you know, missing my family, and you know those experiences that we always shared, and going through those times, those first birthdays, the first, you know, anniversaries, those events, those were very, very difficult early on. And knowing, for example, with Christmas, you know, our first Christmas, experiencing with that, you know, not having them with us and going through that grief. That first year, I would say, even around the fall time, is when I started really feeling even the grief hit me even more, because the holidays were times where we really did a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
So
What
as
did,
the fall approached, I
what did
started,
that,
pardon me,
sorry, what did that grief feel like?
um, couldn't breathe. I mean, it's just the wave of grief takes your breath away. You feel it in your chest, you feel it in your heart. It's something pretty, I believe people share this, and they have. I've read about it, and it's just, you know, it just feels like this wave that just hits you, that
Mm-hmm.
you just can't seem to catch your breath from. And although in my mind, rationally, I mean, I knew I'd be okay physically, I knew, you know, I had to just take things slow. So I didn't push myself with my grief. Like I knew how sensitive that time was. And in order for me to move forward and be an example to my family and try to, you know, take those steps in moving forward and not backward,
Mm-hmm.
and not feeling like I'm going through, just, you know, I didn't want to repeat what I already went through
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. You know, every year, year after year, I want to feel like I healed somewhat.
How do you define hope?
I define it by faith, really, and a belief in what you can do for yourself to bring joy and love back into your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Hope is something you can't see, but you can feel,
Mm-hmm.
and something that absolutely, when you hold on to hope, or when you have any type of hope, it's something that can move you to a new space of positivity and joy. Your inner spirit can do so many things, you know, and part of that is really, again, by believing there is hope, by believing you can. And if your mind is telling you you can't, then it probably won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
If your heart wants something but your mind's telling you something else, it's you know, it's this battle, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they both have to be aligned. And in order for me to be aligned in that, you know, my love of my family also gave me hope. What I saw within my family life, what I saw, you know, and what I experienced in my relationships during difficult times when they were living
Mm-hmm.
was hope.
Mm-hmm.
We went through it. We, you know, overcame challenges, and we were able to persevere. So I saw that in my family, and I thought, there's no way I could allow that this monster, you know, crush those of us that are still here, crush the hopes of those of us that are still here,
Mm-hmm.
and take that away, and still destroy our lives, even with his act and what we lost.
Because it would be very easy for you to have hatred in your heart instead of love. No one would judge you for being bitter.
Right.
You
Right.
hold any resentment or anger or bitterness towards him.
Not anymore. Again, I rationally, I felt like that doesn't make sense. Like, the only way I was able to kind of switch my emotions towards anger, because I'm not one to be I don't like feeling angry. I don't like the way it feels. It doesn't feel good.
Mm.
And not that I wanted to dismiss those emotions, because they're very natural. And like you said, it's a given, this person did this monster did this. How can I not be angry at him? Absolutely. Absolutely. I was very angry about what took place.
Mm-hmm.
But anger was not going to fuel me in the right way to help my family, help myself. And because of my faith, I felt that the energy and what I needed to focus on was, what was right in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
the practical side of and common sense side of living and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so anger was not going to do anything for me. And I knew that I had to deal with that at some point. And so when I got to a point, I want to say maybe a year later, so I didn't really go there. But about a year later, I want to say, I really started thinking and processing more about where he came from, like what the intent besides doing this act, like where it was coming from, where it was stemming from. And I really had to go to a place of feeling, how compassion, basically. I had to have compassion for his heart and mind and where he was at that time that he did this. He must have been feeling so terrible and so awful and with so much pain and anger too. And to carry out an act like this. And, he was, I believe he, was a psychopath, but I think, even that, you still have to have compassion for these human beings that don't take care of their mental health. And for me, I was able to forgive him in spirit, to be able to move forward. He was a baby once. He was a child once. He grew up, and it's unfortunate that his mind took over his body and did this in an evil act.
Have you accepted what has happened?
I believe so. Yes.
How have you learned to do that?
By just living out new experiences and replacing the hard times and those difficult first years with good ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes work. It's hard emotionally, physically, mentally. It's sometimes you don't want to let go. You don't want to let go of the past. You want to hold on to every memory you can. But I believe that we have to create new memories that are joyful and create new memories that are, full of adventure and love and all of the hard emotional, weight can be kind of lifted.
What brings you joy today?
My family, always my family. My dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And doing this. I mean, it is a really difficult thing to share some details and go back to those moments. But being surrounded by love and being surrounded by, positive people and people that have the vision and the intention of living their life kind of the same way, have the same values, which is family, friends,
Mm-hmm.
Joy, having and making memories, and, having experiences together and laughing and, eating and doing all those great things everyone loves to do, and that's kind of what brings me joy, is the being with family.
In overcoming all you've overcome over the last 11, 12 years, what has surprised you most about yourself?
My own strength. I'm like, I really kind of can't believe where I'm at now in my life. I never imagined. I'm going to get emotional. Sorry. I never imagined having this much joy and love. I didn't think I could really get to that place. I believed it and I hoped for it. And as much as I miss my family and my loved ones, I just am so full of gratitude for what I have had, the blessings that I've had. And, you know, I have to say that even my relationships with my nieces and my nephews were very close. And I don't know if I would have been that close with my nieces and nephews had we gone through what we had gone through. You know, it's quite bizarre to say the least, that, you know, who knows what life would have been had my siblings and my parents still be here, what challenges and adversity we would have gone through with them here. So the fact that we've all been able to overcome, it hasn't been just my own hope, you know, and my own way of living, and I've seen it in my children, and that to me brings me joy, seeing how much they've worked on overcoming, and seeing how successful they've been with school and sports, and where they are now, and all, you know, my nieces and nephews, and getting through school and college and having these careers that are amazing. And so it's overwhelming in a positive way. And it's a blessing. It's a total blessing. And I can't believe that I made it this far. You know, I'm very lucky, and I'm very blessed that I can even do this and share with you, because some people probably couldn't.
When I was looking through your Instagram, I saw a quote on it, one that you shared from Maya Angelou, and I've got it here. And it says, "Nothing can dim the light that shines from within." After talking to you today, you're testament to that.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you very much, Rory. I appreciate it.